The topic of the week is undocumented movement. The readings that we have for this week is Taking a Stand. Second one is Valió la Pena. Is Family Separation Worth It? And the two documentaries that introduced were Migrant Crisis, The Deadly Journey from El Salvador to the U.S. And the second documentary is 13. So taking the stand, some of the questions that I posed was, why have students been at the forefront of the Dream Act movement? Second question was, why factors contribute to hostility among different groups regardless of this issue? Lastly, what is the current status of the Dream Act? Taking a stand, why student-led the movement? The author argues that documented youth, particular students, were uniquely positioned separate spearheaders of the Dreamers movement to visibility of moral and authority. One thing we want to acknowledge from this chapters and also from the Dreamers was this purpose came from students, from themselves as youth, trying to figure out how do these students that are documented have some type of leeway from deportation, right? This is during Obama's term. So a lot of things were happening, right? People don't understand, but in this period, the most incarceration of a documented movement wasn't Donald Trump right now presently. It was actually Obama, right? So a lot of these students were trying to figure out a way with how to organize, how to push themselves, how to create policy, and then also how to organize in within community, within state and journey and so forth. So internal conflict and hostility among the groups, right? And then also speaks about, right, despite shared goals, movement experience, a lot of strategies. Some activists focus on legislation, Dream Act, while others focus on the migrant beyond legal status for students, nonprofit, industrial complex, and so forth, right? So this is also some of the movement that is also happened around the early 2000s, right, where people were talking about how do we legalize it, how do we were going to legalize undocumented movements, right? So that's why if you look at a lot of the marches that happened in 06, 07, 08, there were different marches happening at the same time. And there's one of these places that you saw this was on May 1st, especially in downtown LA, where people, were organizing, right? But also it depends on also how were you trying to go away about it, right? So this is one of the conflicts why the students decided, well, wait a minute, there's a lot of different conflict was happening at the time. For instance, right, and there's also the reading doesn't speak about this, but this is where I wanted to introduce a lot of the propositions that also introduced early on in the 90s, and this is why I added a few of these. But this is some of the things and the climate that is happening right now. But also, as somebody that has touched historically, been part of a documented movement, been a part of documented families, and so forth, this is nothing new in the climate we're seeing today, right? For example, Proposition 184 was introduced actually by voters in 1994. At the end of the day, it was filed in the Supreme Court, and when it was unconstitutional, the Proposition 187 is called Our Save Our State Initiative, right? Controversial California, basically students couldn't be, anybody that was documented couldn't be in school and can get any, also medical and so forth, right? And also, one of the things we're seeing now is also reporting requirements, public employees such as teachers, healthcare, and some of these things that we're seeing now. Now we have different Supreme judges, so this is why a lot of the things have changed as well. But I remember in 1994, for my parents would tell me, was like it was crazy. It was crazy times. People were scared and so forth. So these are some of the images, early on from 94. As you can see, a lot of the marches were happening. So these marches that we see now, as we continue, is nothing new, but also it gives light to, wait a minute, like we could organize again the same way they did in 1994, even prior to that. So this is one of the first initiatives that was introduced, how to separate what it called legal and illegal folks. Here in 2005, it was introduced, HR 4437. This was vivid for me just because I was in high school and this was introduced. It's also controversial, anti-terrorism, but it was basically against, undocumented folks, right? And Employees sanctioned for 3 included harsher penalties on employees who are hired undocumented workers, require employees to verify workers' legal status, and so forth. Border security enhancement, allocated funding for 700-mile fence. So this is where one of the first phases was introduced about building the wall. So when we hear this rhetoric of a president, Donald Trump, speaking of building of a wall, he didn't come up with this rhythm, with this rhythm that he speaks, build the wall, so forth. Also, make America great again. That was introduced by Reagan. So a lot of the people think that Donald Trump introduced this ideology, right? But in the end, it wasn't him. He's taking parts of other people have done this work before. So this is why a lot of these initiatives was introduced. And also this is where HR 4437 was a national bill that's trying to push for through legislation, representatives, and so forth. And this is why we will see what we call the million people march. Even the LA Times and different medias would say it's about 500,000 people, but no, I was there. You couldn't move. I mean, we were moving, right? But part of the protest, but in terms of like how much people were there, it was vivid, it was live, it was beautiful. But this is one of those things that, right, like some of the images that happened and during '05. The other one was introduced in Arizona, Senate Bill 1070. This law was an anti-immigration law again, right? Show me your papers. Texas is doing that now. Employing section increased penalties for wrongfully documented hires, right? Crackdown sanctuary cities such as LA, but as we know now, I wouldn't consider California such a sanctuary and so forth. So a lot of these rhetoric continues to pass on, especially we see, let me see your papers. A lot of this, it is happening in Texas. So a lot of these laws that are being introduced by pieces, it gets saved and somebody else is using them because, again, right, like it says in the end, the Supreme Court neglected some of these, but some of these things did pass. So the State of the Dream Act, while original Dream, has faced numerous legislation roadblocks regarding detailing how movement activists contribute to policy, shifts including DACA, which provided temporary some undocumented youth, right? So in the state of where DACA stands at, so the people that had DACA, you have to keep reapplying, make sure that you're following whatever is referred to, right? In terms of making sure, what a lot of the times they're asking you, so you're staying in school, you're working, making sure, doing things the right way. Whereas DACA right now, after Obama left presidency, DACA has been shut down, right? So by Supreme Court, it allowed DACA to exist. There's new waves coming in that DACA is going to be open again, but I don't know what are going to be the circumstances of how do you apply, who's able to apply, and so forth. And these are some of the things that I want to know, especially because I have a lot of documented students that I've had in my past. So this is where these students have told me, on one-on-one privately, like, I'm undocumented, I don't have DACA, and so forth, but these are the real things that are happening even within the students that we have, even today, even as peers and so forth. These are the things that, DACA was able to save a lot of these folks. The second reading was Valió la Pena, Is Family Separation Worth It? As Reframing Migrants' Narrative, Critical Analysis of the Situation in El Salvador, Contrasting Perspectives of El Salvador and the U.S. Views of Migrant Families. So Valió la Pena, Is It Worth It? The authors, critically examine the long-term consequences of U.S. migration policy that separate families, particularly those from Central America. Abrego highlights emotional, economic, psychological toll on migrants of their loved ones, challenging dominant political narratives to justify such policies in the name of national security. So this chapter is really illustrating, separation of families and some of the things that did happen in Salvador early on from the 90s and so forth. One things that I do want to acknowledge was that, as we talk about Salvador being a safe space and so forth, but the U.S. had a lot of intervention in El Salvador, right? In terms of military gone into Salvador in the 90s, the assassination of a famous priest that, was trying to save the people and so forth, the economic in Salvador, right? So these are some of the things that, the authors are speaking about why people have left El Salvador. Even now, when people say Bukele isn't presently there, El Salvador safe. I've been there. From my own perspective, does it feel safe? Yes, in some regards it does feel safe, but I'm also challenging what does it mean to feel safe, especially a lot of the places where I was working around. There's a lot of military around me, so I don't know if that's safe for me. I was also questioned by military. Where was I going when I was trying to go home, right? So these are the things that I am seeing. What things that I do see in El Salvador still to this day is a lot of poverty, a lot of people, street vendors and so forth. So those are the things that I am challenging within, as we do these readings, and we are saying that El Salvador is in a better space. Yes, in somewhat it is, but also there's a lot of, with this reading doesn't talk about it as much, but there's a lot of intervention in Salvador, especially from outsiders, right? Who isn't intervening, who's buying El Salvador, who's profiting from El Salvador and so forth. And also the Bitcoin, how's that working out? Hasn't really worked out. What I've been told, even from family in Salvador, the only place you could use Bitcoin was in a vet for animals. And that's the only period where you need to have Bitcoins and so forth. So again, right? So a lot of the things that this chapter is speaking about, the separation of family, in terms of parents and their children. For me, for example, I have older brothers and older sisters who were separated from their families when they migrated from El Salvador to the U.S. That's why these two chapters really resonate with me in terms of how they speak about it, and also the sadness that happens when the separation does exist, right? In some cases, has worked, and in some cases it hasn't, right? Especially as we see it now in the migration climate. When we're seeing again, right, when children are being separated from families and so forth. Let me see if I ever have the images. So these are some of the highlights that I'm speaking about in terms of the readings, but this is the images that I'm speaking about when we are talking about, is it worth it, right? And this is some of the conditions that we're seeing now, even after this was back in 2010 and so forth. And they basically, so some of these places on the bottom piece, they call it the hielera, right? Basically because that place was cold, right? And a lot of you see these images of foil papers to keep these kids warm, but nonetheless, that's not doing any good for anybody. Even on the right side, you can see how much is impacted, and why I'll speak a little bit why the documentaries that I show for us to make a connection why these things do exist, right? In terms of how we're looking at migration, and also what we're doing to people that are being right now being kidnapped. There's no other way of going about it, especially when law enforcement that are finding you are not saying they have a warrant for you. They're just arresting you even without knowing that you are a citizen or not. So in this film, I am speaking about basically resonating how the journey is for in some places, right? This one push a factor of driving, right? We're talking about gang violence, violence, poverty, lack of opportunity, dangerous journey. What does that look like? Some people took on buses, some people take on foot. The humanitarian crisis for my mother when she got to the U.S. My mom's a migrant. She got to Mexico through plane, and then from there she went on foot. My father took the long route, and he did by foot. Even with different people that I have experienced, with different family members, they all have different migration story because the route changes. Because again, Border Patrol is gonna find out how's people coming, right? So they speak about not eating. You also what we call them the coyotes, are people that help you travel, right? They're also waiting for the money, right? So there's also a lot of political dangerous stuff that happens in this journey, whether you have the money or not. Because if you came to the U.S. and you don't have the money, they won't give you the person. So that's also part of that dangerous journey too, that is not even told within these stories. And also, the documentaries talk about borders, U.S. policies, personal stories, and team to reflect on who suffers, who benefits, the cycle, right, that it continues. When we talk about, people speak about migration as people want to come to the U.S., take advantage of the system. This documentary shows you different perspective in terms of why these people decided to migrate. And the reason I introduced 13 documentary is to give an example of today's climate. How are we looking at prison? Who's going into prison and who's benefit from prison? Right. So we're talking about the 13th Amendment loopholes, right? When we are talking about slavery, and people don't understand, people are still making stuff in prison, such as toothbrushes, furniture, and so forth. But we won't know that, right? So this is what also goes with how much are we paying for these things that we have in our own house when we don't even know who's making all these stuff, right? So this is why we talk about slaveries continue to exist, right? Without even saying it, we do, right? So also the construction of criminalization, right? That's also things that is being popped up. The rise of mass incarceration, U.S. Prison population, the prison industrial complex. We can speak about that. Who's benefiting from prison, the money that is involved in prison. This is why they speak about the Dodgers owner being part of this, because the Dodgers owner has money involved in prison, right? And some of these prisons also holding undocumented people, right? So this is why we talk about the role of politics, both Republican, Democratic, tough on crime policies. One of the policies that was created through California was a three strikes law, right? And the guy who created also came back, and a different documentary speaks about that he should have never had it. So how three strikes works is that you do basically each time you're doing a crime, you're calling a strike, but there were felonies, right? So felonies can be stealing something, depending now. The loopholes, the law's changing, but if you do the two felonies, and the third time, right, like you're trying to like be better, but on the third time you're stealing a pizza, right, or anything to eat, they could easily say that was a third strike, and then from there you were in prison for life, right? So basically, even though each time you came to prison, you did the time, you came out, second time is called your second strike. Once you considered, they called you a third striker, you were in there for life. So these are some of the things that the policy was changed and continues to change, right? Even when people talk about Bill Clinton, but also Bill Clinton expanded policy, prison, and hard sentencing. And the last piece of documentary talks about corporate interests, prison industrial complex, something that I was just talking about earlier, how everything is being private, but also what does it mean when these things are private? Like, who are you suing when a lot of injustice is happening in this prison? For example, right now, when we're looking at prison that holds undocumented people or U.S. citizens, people are dying in these prisons, but nobody's holding them accountable in terms of these corporations, or even how we are treating these people, right? Even when we look at, everybody's talking about Epstein, right? Epstein supposedly hanged himself, but they're still, these are the things they're trying to figure out. Like, people don't know. There's no really straightforward line how they're telling you what's really happening in these prisons, right? And also media and public perception. That was going to talk about, how we're talking about black men, people of color, how we're talking about brown men now in media, in terms of, right, who are these people that are called undocumented? The way we're looking at about safe cities now, the way that National Guards are going to Chicago, Portland, DC, and so forth. I know people, there's a person in social media that is a veterano, they're just trying to fight back, right? But to showcase that the city is now what is being portrayed in media. And also the 13 documentary speaks about racial equality, social impact. Lastly, is speaking about the activism and resistance. Is highlighting the voice of scholars, politicians, and reform. Also, Black Lives Matter. So these are some of the movies that continue to work. This is why I showcase two stories. One speaking from perspective from here in the U.S. What does it mean for a person who are undocumented and want to have a path to being documented, with all these barriers, trying to, you have to push, because there's not an easy path for somebody to document to come in. Even if people say do the right way, it hasn't been hard. Even as I've shown you through different chapters, right? How hard is it to be undocumented, even when the system is trying to fight against you all the time? and also the documentaries. So show two different perspectives. One is what does it mean, how to tie in the documentary with the reading, the perspectives of these people who are actually doing the migrate walk, and also what does it mean for, when we're looking at 13th, we're looking at prison industrial, we're looking at folks, the exploitation all around. So these are some of the things that we're looking at this week.